Okay. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate you having me. Looks like there's a lot of good information coming out. I'm excited for that. I was asked today to talk about stormwater BMP inspection and compliance. I guess just introduce myself again. I think I've been attending these meetings for a while on behalf of some of the municipal clients that we work for. I work for Cedarville Engineering and manage the MS4 program for our municipal clients in varying capacities. The objective of this presentation today is to kind of go over the stormwater BMP inspection process and what the options are for municipalities, how it starts, creating and maintaining a BMP inventory, common inspection issues, and importantly, a compliance process to establish that. This is to address part of MCM5, and everyone in this group should be very familiar with all these acronyms, so I don't need to explain it. Basically, the goal of the presentation today is to provide an option for municipalities to ensure that stormwater BMPs are properly operated and maintained by their owners. And this example provides a simple and hopefully effective inspection program for these BMPs. Also to consider your PRP BMPs or those that are installed as part of your TMDL plan. They should be added to your inventory. But just a caveat to say that municipalities aren't required to inspect post-construction stormwater BMPs by DEP. DEP simply says that municipalities must ensure that they are being properly operated and maintained by their owners or by the responsible parties. So whatever program you develop to ensure that this is occurring is welcome by DEP. That was a change from last permit cycle to this permit cycle. It did have an inspection program requirement last permit cycle, and the MCM5 has gotten a little bit more vague this year, or this permit round, so that if you want to place the responsibility on the owner to hire a professional to conduct their own inspections and submit that information to the municipality, you can. You just have to have the proper mechanisms in place for that. And we'll get into that a little bit more further down in the presentation. This is going to concentrate on the example of if the municipality is conducting the inspections themselves. Okay, so it all starts with the BMP inventory. And the column here on the left is straight out of the permit requirements. What are you required to include on your inventory? So generally, BMPs that are approved have been approved as part of an NPDES permit for construction activities since March 10th, 2003. So any basically land development greater than 1 acre. Your location, your responsible party information, name, contact, address, phone number, the BMP type and the year that was installed, maintenance requirements in the permit. It refers to the maintenance requirements that are outlined in the Stormwater BMP manual, but you also want to dig up those O&M agreements and list this information here because that is going to become important as you develop an inspection and compliance program. And then the actual inspection and maintenance activity that has occurred and a compliance assessment of the activity that has occurred in that reporting period or in that year. So basically DEP is requiring the inventory to have a status update every year of what is the status of that BMP? Is it functioning? Is it not functioning? So how are you going to be able to properly answer that question without either conducting your own inspections or having the property owner or responsible party hire a professional and conduct the inspections for them? So it all depends on what is right for your municipality. How to create the inventory. Now, most everybody in this virtual room probably has a pretty complete BMP inventory. However, when you really dig deep, a lot of times it's easy to kind of miss one old development or one that maybe was the previous engineer worked with. The best thing to do, and not to place the burden on Chester County Conservation District, but they keep really great records, and they have lists of NPDES permits that have been issued by municipality, and you can just contact the Conservation District and request those lists to kind of QA/QC your inventory to make sure that you have everything that has been issued. And then when it comes to getting the plans, that's another consideration. Sometimes municipal records aren't comprehensive. Sometimes that information went with a previous consultant, or it may not be in-house, or maybe you can't find the latest and greatest. County Conservation District can also be a good resource for that. The courthouse is also a good resource for that. However, a lot of times they don't record the entire land development plan set, so you might not get the post-construction stormwater plans. But you need those plans in order to know exactly where that BMP is to conduct the inspection, and also to check for any O&M requirements, to check the details of how that BMP was supposed to be constructed. And how to track GIS versus a spreadsheet. GIS is really the way to go in terms of conveying the information and making sure that institutional knowledge is transferred. Just because a township staff or a public works director may know where that BMP is, but the next person may not know the exact location. To see that on a map is really the most ideal way to do it. Now, GIS can easily be converted to a spreadsheet, and it can go back and forth because GIS really has a spreadsheet behind it. So I say both. Other tracking considerations. So that's what the permit says, is that you basically just have to have an inventory of all the BMPs that were constructed as part of an approved permit from March 10th, 2003 on. However, you have to track BMPs installed for projects less than an acre that are required by the municipal ordinance for other reasons. So whether you want to put those BMPs and lump them in as part of this inspection program, that is a decision for each individual municipality. Another consideration are those old stormwater basins that were authorized prior to March 10th, 2003. There's no requirement for a municipality to ensure that they're properly operated and maintained. But I know that those BMPs tend to be the ones that aren't functioning as well and get the most complaints. So that's a consideration. Another tracking consideration is, are the BMPs privately owned? Are they owned by an HOA? Are they owned by the municipality? Are you going to track the municipally owned BMPs as part of this inspection program, or are you going to track them as part of another inspection program, like as part of your good housekeeping program? And then finally, you have your BMPs that are required to be in on the BMP inventory as part of because they were constructed after 2003. And then you have BMPs that you're also required that are to make sure that they're operated and maintained properly, as installed to meet the requirements of your pollutant reduction plan or your TMDL plan. So you may want to consider adding those BMPs to your inventory and tracking them simultaneously and using the same inspection program for that. Okay, so what is an inspection program, or what are the components? It's important to identify the who, when, and what. Who should inspect the BMPs? Currently, there are no guidelines from DEP as to qualifications for inspectors of these BMPs. In terms of our professional opinion, to be a qualified municipal staff or an authorized qualified subcontractor. So qualified means having a general knowledge of the functionality of BMPs from a design or construction standpoint, or having received some sort of training. Ideally, the training that they have received should be both kind of in the classroom training as well as in the field training. And then also, when you have your inspectors going out to the site, you want to consider safety. And do you want one person or a two-man inspection crew? And then also a consideration for inspecting the BMPs is site access and property owner notification. That is actually a big part of this process, and where we've come up with a process is to send the property owner a notification letter that inspections will be conducted during a particular time frame. And that letter can also serve as outreach, because in a lot of times the property owner may not even know that they have a BMP on their property or what a BMP is. So you can include information in that letter to educate the homeowner or the property owner what's on their property, what to anticipate, what is about to happen. And then when should the BMPs be inspected? In terms of frequency, if you're looking to answer the question on the annual report, it would be annually. Do they need to be inspected annually? That's really up for your municipality to decide what the necessity is. Maybe you conduct inspections 3 years in a row and there's absolutely no change to the condition of that BMP. You may decide that you can reduce the frequency of that. It's really your comfort level to be able to adequately answer the question and the requirements of the MS4 permit. And then weather conditions in terms of when you should conduct the inspection. It's always good to conduct an inspection after a major rain event to see how the system is functioning. It's also good to consider looking at the BMP during dry weather versus wet weather. However, if you're just doing one inspection a year, most BMPs are designed to fully dewater. Now that's most, not all, within a 72-hour period after a rain event. So that is probably your best bet in terms of conducting your inspection to make sure that it's functioning properly. What to bring with you. If you're an inspector, you want to bring some sort of credentials and make sure that you knock on the door, maybe not right now, and in terms of the restrictions that we're in, but to make sure that the property owner knows that you're on site. If you have developed an inspection program documenting this protocol and you're new to it, you might want to bring that with you to refer to it. Also, the ordinance would be helpful. Tool to open observation wells and also a measuring tape. This is really important, especially if the only way to view the inside of a BMP is a manhole lid. You might need an opener to look in there. And then a flashlight would be good also, so that you can see down. Sometimes a clean out pipe to look into an infiltration bed or a seepage bed, they might be very narrow and it gets dark quickly. You can only see, say, 6 inches to 12 inches in. You need a flashlight to shine down there to see if there's water present or not. And then a camera or a phone to take photographs. Your plans, of course, to make sure that the BMP is functioning as designed. And then inspection forms or a tablet or a phone. So if you have a tablet, and you could potentially not have to bring over half of the items on this list because you could have the information accessible digitally, including mapping, the location of it. You could have your map accessible like this and zoom in and you can see where your BMP is, which is one of these pink stars. And then you click on that. You can even attach your plans right to it. So that makes it really convenient to zoom in and check what you're looking for your BMPs. it's something to consider to increase efficiency. And then here is an example of an inspection form that can be accessed on a phone or an iPad. Just kind of an example of how technology can kind of streamline your process and have less items to bring with you and prepare for as you go out for your inspections. And this form allows you to attach photos to it. It accesses your camera. And then Survey 123, which is an Esri product, will convert that into a traditional form as well to document your inspection and your site visit. And it also attaches the photos like that. Okay, so normally when I would do this presentation, I would go over the different BMP types and identify all of the different components to it. You know, inflows, outflows, examples of what types of vegetation should be in there, and that type of thing. I think a lot of people in this audience know the general components of a BMP. So I'm just going to go over what to look for in terms of what is what's wrong, and I think everybody is pretty familiar with this too. But just generally inconsistencies with the plan, any accelerated erosion, excess sediment, debris, and trash accumulation, structural integrity of BMP components like the outlet structures and the pipes, unstabilized areas in the BMP and within the BMP's drainage area, and then unmaintained vegetation. That's not like a comprehensive list, but it's just it's just the key components. Then any deficiencies that are similar to that should be noted on your form and take photographs. And that the photographs are really the most important part. It allows you to properly follow up because I think that it's really hard to remember exactly based on just a check mark a lot of times. You should take some detailed notes if possible, and also photographs. Okay, so here are just generally, if you have a stormwater basin that's an infiltration basin, if you have a retention basin or a wet pond, if you have a seepage bed, if you have a rain garden, a lot of these components are part of all different types of BMPs. There's a way for the water to go in, there's a way for the water to go out. A lot of times there's an overflow or emergency spillway. Sometimes there's an underdrain, and then you have vegetation in most cases. And then you have the area that drains to the BMP. So those are the items that you need to concentrate on when you go and do a BMP inspection. And then again, here are some typical problems or violations, and I'll show some examples that we've encountered in the field. So over here we have a pipe that's as part of a seepage bed underground. You can see the sediment entering it and accumulating in it, and that is going to clog the system. The seepage beds are meant to infiltrate into the ground. That needs to be addressed immediately. Remove the sediment, identify the source of the sediment, stop it from entering the bed, or else this is at risk of having to be entirely reconstructed. And same over here for this basin. There's sediment accumulation in the basin. It's important to remove it. And if you pump it out, it has to be pumped through a pumped water filter bag. It can't just be pumped directly into the stream. Or if it's over a really long vegetated surface, I think a flat surface, you just have to be careful about sediment discharges. And so the township may not be responsible for cleaning the sediment, but to make sure that the responsible party does do that. And then acknowledge as the inspector what was the source of that sediment into that basin in the upstream drainage area. Okay, you might run into deteriorating structures. Right here, we have an outlet pipe that's been undermined, and as a result, the riprap apron has been displaced. And we also have a typical corrugated metal pipe that's been corroded, which is not an unfamiliar sight. Examples of accelerated erosion: you have erosion below the basin outlet, which would need to be identified and written up on the inspection report. The responsible party would need to regrade that and restabilize it. You have an erosion into the basin, same thing there. And then you have erosion at a spillway. So one thing to note as when you're conducting inspections is think about the severity of the violation. The photo in the center and the photo on the left, these are very severe erosion situations that need to be repaired. In fact, if the responsible party repairs them and the same thing happens again, they may need to have a different solution to that. So either they're not replacing it the way that it was originally designed, or maybe something changed and they need a different engineering solution and they need to look at an alternative in terms of maybe bigger riprap or something else, and have an engineer propose a solution or propose a solution themselves in coordination with the township or the municipality. And then on the right there, you see spillway erosion, and this is where you have to use a little bit of discretion when you're doing inspections. So you might see some rills that develop on slopes that are completely revegetated, but the rills are there. You can see that they're there, but maybe they're not actively eroding. This situation may be a little bit borderline. It looks like it is actively eroding, but say it was completely covered with grass. Just to repair the rill, it's not worth the amount of disturbance. Going in with a piece of equipment would cause to regrade that area and restabilize it. So there should be kind of a common sense approach to these violations. And then you have excess vegetation. Here, there's supposed to be a level spreader in there. And well, the vegetation itself may or may not be impeding the functionality of the level spreader. The inspector can't get in to even see that, to see if it's functioning properly. So that the excess vegetation needs to be removed, whether or not is it actually affecting the functionality of the BMP. And then in this basin, it's completely overgrown with woody vegetation and not being maintained per plan. So there are, implications in terms of, potentially capacity. Large woody vegetation on basin berms could threaten the structural stability of them, and a lot of other potential threats. Debris accumulation. Here we have a clogged outlet pipe, so it's going to cause the water to back up somewhere. That's not good. And then we have trash and debris in a basin, which will eventually either enter in the streams or clog something it shouldn't and cause a backup. And then, of course, you have just general maintenance issues. And this is a rain garden that is struggling big time. And the vegetation hasn't been established. The mulch layer is not maintained, and there's long-term ponding. So all three of these things would need to be noted on the inspection report, and the responsible party come up with a solution, whether they repair it per plan or they need to really go back to the drawing board and see why this thing isn't functioning properly. And then, of course, you have the old BMP removal, where you go to look for where the BMP is supposed to be, and it's not there. So that happens frequently. You also want to make sure that you have the most recent, latest and greatest set of plans, because throughout the land development review process, things can change and BMP locations can change. And you want to make sure that you're using the most up-to-date set of plans when you go out and conduct these inspections. It's really important. All right, here's an example of the compliance process as part of BMP inspections. This is not necessarily a template by any means that anybody should follow. It's just an example. So to start it out, I mentioned earlier, you can send out a notice of inspection letter. It's recommended you do all of this correspondence, at least initially, in coordination with your solicitor, to make sure that everything is legally intact. Most correspondence should be sent certified to make sure that the responsible party has received it. Once you send out that notice of inspection letter, conduct your routine inspection. If everything is in order, you can send out a letter of compliance to document that everything is in order. If there are violations that need to be addressed, then you send out a notice of non-compliance and send that certified. Once the property owner conducts the maintenance operations or repairs that they need to, you'd have to conduct a follow-up inspection. And then, as you can see, the process evolves. If they haven't complied within after the follow-up inspection, then you elevate the enforcement to notice of violation. And then if they still haven't, you can elevate it to an enforcement and assess fines and penalties in order to provide an incentive for compliance. I will say that this process is something that is particular to a municipality, and you have to develop what works for you in coordination with your staff and your solicitor and who's conducting your inspections. And it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and a lot of times per each violation or per each inspection. So it's important that you always refer to your ordinance, because this is what, if you end up assessing violations and penalties, is going to hold up in court, and to make sure that you can adequately cite where there's a violation of the ordinance in coordination with the solicitor. In extreme cases or pollution events, you may need to coordinate with other organizations like your conservation district, your Chester County Conservation District, Fish and Boat, DEP, or EPA. Now, I will say that DEP would like the municipalities to handle these as much as possible, and that's part of the purpose of the MS4 requirements, is for the municipality to enforce the ordinance that you have, and to try to delegate some of that responsibility on the local level. So as much as possible, the municipality should handle it. If you see a huge sediment discharge as a result of a BMP not functioning, and there's potential large pollution event as a result of it, and that's where you want to contact DEP. Fish kill associated with it, Fish and Boat would get involved. And as well as the conservation district if there is, sediment discharge. One thing to consider when you conduct inspections is public outreach. Generally, people want to do the right thing, they just don't know what to do. And a lot of times, the post-construction stormwater management plans are overwhelming to look at for a resident or for an organization or an HOA. DEP actually has a pretty good educational resource here on their website. If you Google it, you can find it. It's called A Homeowner's Guide to Stormwater BMP Maintenance. And it kind of summarizes the maintenance requirements in the BMP manual. It may not be particular to their BMP or their O&M requirements, but it gives a good general overview of it. And in summary, it's important to develop a streamlined compliance process that works for your municipality. Conducting your own inspections is one option. Having the responsible party conduct inspections and submit that information to the township is another option. However, you have to have a mechanism in place for that, like an O&M agreement. And a lot of times, O&M agreements that exist may not have that specifically in there, that a responsible party is required, or that it may have just that a responsible party has to submit whatever operations and maintenance activities they conducted for a year. If you feel like you can rely on that information, it's still going to take a lot of time to track it and obtain it. So that is an option. I think in terms of streamlining a process, conducting inspections for each BMP is definitely a good option. Challenges that may be encountered throughout this process is tracking and documentation. That is always a challenge. One way to resolve that is to use technology. And another challenge is locating information in general. A lot of this information is spread out over lots of different resources. Your post-construction stormwater management plans, the older ones are still located on grading and utility plans. Sometimes there's an O&M agreement, sometimes there's not. Sometimes it's recorded, sometimes it's not. It ends up being time consuming to find all this information. In terms of O&M agreements, when you go and look at your inventory of BMPs, you might find that only 20% of them actually have recorded O&M agreements. And of that 20%, they're all different, even though a template was provided as part of the 167 ordinance. So if you're using the O&M agreement as your primary mechanism, you may be looking at a compliance process that's unique to each individual BMP, which is really hard to manage that program. So that's a consideration for existing BMPs. That's a consideration for BMPs moving forward. You know, the importance of consistencies in O&M agreements and the importance of making sure that those O&M agreements have been recorded, because that is the communication mechanism for property owner transfers and that type of thing. And then finally, one thing that's come to our attention is that notice of terminations for MPDS permit for stormwater, like construction activities, they are not being filed for really, really long periods of time. So when you go to update your inventory, you may have a site that has had the roads dedicated to the township. It's been done, you know, for the last 5 years, and you look for the notice of termination of the construction activities permit, and it's not there. That's really the mechanism for transferring it over to the responsibility of the municipality. So these BMPs, if the notices of termination are not filed, they do not get onto your inventory. They do not get inspected and properly operated and maintained potentially. And they become the issues that we've had in the past from the basins that were constructed in the 80s and 90s. So that's a consideration for municipalities. I don't know what DEP's perspective on that is. I know that there has been kind of a little bit of a gap with them. If you have received your annual report review from DEP, from Krista Brown, she's kind of included some information on a recommendation is to hold your escrow, or make a requirement to hold escrow until an NOT has been filed by the contractor, and to ensure that this process closes and moves forward. And that's something that she has made as a suggestion, and I know that some municipalities do that. It certainly is not required, but that's something just to be aware of, is that the NOTs, and it's not by any the fault of the conservation district by any means, NOTs are lagging behind. And then just to note that your program will evolve over time, and you can plan it out as much as you want in advance, but it's going to change and it's going to be dynamic. And that's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? I mean, this is my kids enjoying the West Branch Brandywine, and I think it's one of the reasons that we all do what we do. So yeah, I'll take any questions if anybody has some.
Thank you, Beth. I maybe Corey, you could unmute people. I think we're a small enough group we could use the discussion, but I also just sent a general question. I'm curious how many people you know, are already doing an inspection program or whatnot. So if you want to respond via chat, but any questions, go ahead.
All right, so I'm in the process of allowing everybody to talk. So if you do have a question in the next 30 seconds, you should be able to talk.
Kennett Township inspects all basins annually. Excellent.
I know that I've been at property owners who have a basin in their backyard and they didn't even know what it was. It was all vegetated. They were surprised.
We've definitely seen where it ends up being like the dump zone where they dump yard debris or something. They're like, oh, this is a nice concave spot to put, or they're trying to cover up the outlet structure because it's ugly, so they dump their yard debris on that. So yeah, it's not only a compliance issue, but it's education. And I think once, a lot of times, you know, say like 95% of people, once they know that there's a reason for